Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, joined by Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 as we preview SEC basketball for Wednesday night. Blake, just two games now that Mississippi State and Missouri has been postponed. Let's start with the biggest one, Alabama at Florida. Florida, according to Ken Palm, about a 1-point home favorite. Both these teams have been erratic. What are we expecting here?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I think you said it. I think erratic is the right word because you just don't really know what to expect from these two. I think that for Florida, the situation is, beyond that little stretch there where they, lost 3 or 4, they've really only played, two teams that they're much better than since then. So I don't know if it gives you just a great gauge on where exactly, they're at on that. I tend to think we're going to put a lot of weight into that Texas Southern game where they just lost by 15. I think you just kind of chalk that up at this point to one of those games in a 30 something game college basketball season individually for each team that just happens sometimes. I think that's kind of what you look at. I don't think that's, yes, is it part of a bigger thing with Florida over the years, just with the inconsistency? I mean, that's the word I've used for years now with Florida, is just inconsistent. They get to a certain point, but then, they can't maintain that consistency to stay there. And I think that's one of those games that kind of brings you back to that issue. But I also think that, Florida's not on a night in, night out basis 15 points worse than Texas Southern. And so I think this is probably a game where, I mean, it's the toughest, I guess, the Ohio State game that was in late November. But, as we said, Florida's seemingly a bit of a different team at this point, and they haven't played, for a couple of weeks now. I think this is an opportunity for them to really get a big win because we talked about it, this first three-game stretch they're going to have. They've got Bama, Auburn, and LSU, which, you could make the argument maybe the three best teams, although Alabama's maybe slipped down a little bit on that. But I think it's an interesting matchup just because defensively Florida's pretty good. Alabama, offensively, we know can be very good. They've been a little more up and down in that category. And as I've said, I just don't think they're as good of a defensive team as they were a year ago. I don't think they're getting as much offense out of their defense. It's a fascinating matchup on paper just based on how these two teams play and really how they've both been playing coming into this game.
The two players I'm watching in this, for Florida, Colin Castleton, he's one of the better big men in the league this year, in a good year for big men. And Alabama's got maybe a potential answer there in Charles Bediako, who's a 5-star freshman recruit, but he's a freshman. He's not been one of their key guys. And then on Alabama's end, you've got Juwan Gary. Noah Gurley is who I meant to say. Juwan Gary's a good player too, but Noah Gurley, the guy that you and I really liked coming into the season, was a great player at Furman. Hadn't really done much and then had a 20-point game and was probably the star of the game when they beat Tennessee. How do those two guys factor into this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. You brought up Colin Castleton. I think obviously he's going to be the guy that if Florida's going to win, he's going to need to be the guy that pushes them there, just based on how he plays. And I think it's also important to think about, Alabama is going to take a lot of threes. We understand that. We know how they play. But they've also been pretty efficient, inside of three-point range. And I think that's where having someone like Castleton who can block shots for Florida, can challenge you a little bit there and maybe put that pressure on making you shoot more threes in those kind of scenarios. So that's where Alabama's been they've been an average three-point shooting team. Like, they're not an elite three-point shooting team right now. But we know they can be. And that's the problem when you play Alabama is they're going to push the pace enough to where, they're going to put up enough shots. And it's just going to be, if they're hitting shots, it can be very difficult. If they're not hitting shots, that's just kind of how it works. So I think that's where Castleton can make sort of a big impact on, how he impacts the game and all that. But I think on the other side, you mentioned, the common theme here is, for Gurley, we've seen him step up in some of these games. And then you've got someone, like Bediako, who is a freshman, and, he is going to be able to use that size. And I think it's kind of a scenario here where, for Alabama specifically, I think it's a matter of who are those guys, outside of your main guys that step up I think that's going to probably be the difference in a game like this, where, I mean, you kind of know what to expect from, your big guards right now, and what they can do, but it's how are some of the other guys going to, kind of step up and make plays. And that's where I think your X factors could be those guys, like you mentioned, whether that's a Gurley, a Bediako, ones like that. So.
Well, here's another guy on the Florida side we haven't talked about much, but Flanders Fleming, I think, was the two-time reigning Big South Defensive Player of the Year, for whatever that's worth, before he transferred to Florida. We've talked about Alabama being guard-oriented. If he can be an eraser for Florida of sorts in terms of limiting or taking away Shackelford or Quinterly, that could be big in this one too.
Yeah, no, it could. And I mean, I think if you're Florida, the recipe for success, I think, is going to be, even though it is a team that gets a lot of their points from the 3-point line, I still think you want to, you just want to try to force Alabama to do that. You want to force them to make shots. And, it's also a team that is not a good free throw shooting team. And I think that's something that we've talked about before with Alabama, at various points throughout the years, is close games. This is not a good free throw shooting team. And I think Florida's approach is the most interesting part of this, is how does Florida approach it from a game planning standpoint? Because really, offensively, Florida puts up shots in a hurry too. Like, they're a team that can push the pace if they want to, and much more so than maybe we were used to with some of the other teams Mike White's had over the years there. But I think Florida's defense, everything is on that. How can they sort of impact how Alabama, approaches things offensively, and can Castleton be someone that, can kind of use his size and really make things a problem when Alabama tries to drive. And that's where I think, you've got to, I'm not saying you let Alabama shoot wide open threes, because that's not going to work, but I think you've got to force them, to make shots on you, but it's got to be contested shots. You can't just let them do what they want on the perimeter. So.
Okay, Ken Palm's got this as Florida -1. Your gut feeling on where you'd go if that ends up being the line?
Man, yeah, it's
and let me say something for Blake. Blake does not like to offer an opinion just for the sake of offering an opinion. So I think there's value in that. So if your hesitancy there says a lot to me.
Well, look, it's two inconsistent teams, and they're two teams that are not playing their best right now. I mean, if anyone wants to disagree with that, that's fine. But I mean, if you just look at how they've played over the past month, these are two teams that have not shown their best, and I think those are the games that are always very hard to predict, especially, I know Alabama rebounded with the win against Tennessee, but we talked about it. Like, Alabama played well, but I mean, still, Alabama didn't play great, right?
No, Alabama didn't play
Tennessee
great.
Team.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, and that's like we talked about. I mean, Florida hasn't played in what? Florida hasn't played in 2 weeks. Yeah, so it's been 2 weeks since they played. I mean, that's a bit of a break, because their game against what I think was Ole Miss got canceled. So, I mean, that's a layoff for a team that hadn't been playing well. So it's like, do you expect them just to come right back out and all of a sudden win by 15 or 20? I don't think so. So yeah, I mean, it's not a cop out. It's just, I think you've got two very inconsistent teams. Who do I think is the better team overall? I think it's Alabama. But does that change in a game like this, where Florida's defense, I think, can give them some issues? We'll see. That's where I think. Again, I think it's how Florida plays on the defensive side. That's going to determine this. I would probably pick Alabama, just because I think they're the better team overall. But this is one of those games, like you said. I mean, if it's a 1-point game or whatever, it's essentially take your pick, because it could go either way.
Okay, here's another game that I think is going to be interesting. You've got Tennessee hosting Ole Miss. Tennessee about a 15-point favorite at home. Ole Miss has just been awful lately. That's a lot of points. Kermit Davis, for all the struggles they've had, is a good coach. And I don't know. I don't know if that I trust Tennessee's offense enough to cover 15, Blake.
You remember the game they played last year, right? The 52-50.
Oh, that's
game,
right.
The one that struggled to get to 52-50.
I think we call that a rock fight.
Well, yeah, but as I say, that's one that even the score line is a little misleading, because I think it felt like it struggled to get to the 50-point mark for either team. I don't know if that's going to be the case this year, but you said it. I mean, Ole Miss has not has not been great thus far. I mean, you look at their resume. We talk about teams that have had a 2-week layoff. They've had a 2-week layoff after losing at home to Samford, who, nothing against Samford, but they shouldn't be winning in Oxford. And that's one of those games that really makes you scratch your head. And Ole Miss lost that game by 20 something earlier in December against Western Kentucky, but yet, they beat Memphis, they've beaten Dayton, and teams like that. So I mean, you're certainly going to lean towards Tennessee in this game. There's no question. I think it's, do I think Ole Miss could struggle, to hit that 50 something point mark. Like, I think Tennessee is good enough defensively that I just think they're gonna present some challenges here. And like you said, I think it's how much trust you have in Tennessee's offense to kind of just blow things open in a game like this. It is a lot of points, but I tell you, I would probably, I would hesitate a little bit just because of the Kermit Davis factor. I think in terms of his teams are still going to defend, and
Right.
they haven't been great offensively, but they're gonna cause some issues defensively. Even again, they haven't shown it necessarily at times this year, but they're still not a team that's going to give up a ton of points. And I think just how they play, it is going to be more of a, I don't know what the right word is, cerebral, sort of methodical type style, maybe. Which, for Tennessee, they are not exactly playing like that with this team. This team is kind of able with Kennedy Chandler to get up the floor a little bit more, and so, I mean, it's again, I think that 15-point mark it looks high. If Tennessee gets rolling and they defend the way they can defend, I think they could certainly shut down Ole Miss offensively. But I tend to think that Ole Miss defensively is probably solid enough to create some issues. But yeah, this is one that it's tough. Like, I'd probably still lean on Tennessee to kind of hit that number just because I just think they're better. And maybe significantly better at this point. But I think that's where Ole Miss's defense worries me a little bit, because I think that we've seen at times with Tennessee's offense, it hasn't been there all the time. But I think that, it could be, I don't think it's going to be the traditional rock fight. It's not going to be 52-50, but I think this could be it should be a low scoring game, I think, with these two. So,
Well, and there's two ways to look at it, right? Ole Miss may have trouble getting to 50, as you said, but what I mean with Tennessee's offense, Ole Miss is 50th in Ken Palm's adjusted defensive efficiency. Kermit's teams always defend. And I guess throw Alabama out because they're without Kennedy Chandler and Fulkerson, and they get 68 in that one in a loss at Alabama last time out. And they did put up 77 against Arizona, which, some people that thought was the best team in the country to that point, was unbeaten. But I go back and I look, and here's what I mean about offensive inconsistency for Tennessee. 52 points against Texas Tech, 53 against Villanova, and to me, that's 15's a lot to cover in that spot. But you're right, Tennessee is significantly better than Ole Miss too, so there's that.
Yeah, this one's tricky just because I think if you go by what you've seen to this point, I think Tennessee probably wins this game by 15 plus, because I just think that they've proven to be significantly better in a lot of different areas. But I think it's like the historical aspect of it with Tennessee sometimes is you kind of keep that in the back of your mind, is they have had some of those games that not necessarily been great on the offensive end. And I think that's where, someone like Kermit Davis, who, as we said, this is more of one, if you're going to go on the side of Ole Miss in this one, this is more of probably the historical Kermit Davis effect of defensive teams, right? If you just go up and down the line, I mean, when's the last time he had just a bad defensive team? I couldn't tell you. Like, it probably would have been a decade ago. It's my guess. Probably, some of those MTSU teams that were just, starting to make their move. They weren't quite there yet. That's my guess, because I don't think he's had many bad defensive teams at all. So I think that's one where if Ole Miss controls the tempo a bit, because it is a difference this year with in terms of how Tennessee plays. They're playing, very more up tempo, and they're getting more shots. If Ole Miss can control that, that's really like, all right, getting to 15, that could be a challenge. But I still think Tennessee is probably good enough to hit that, because I just think that they are, as we said, with Kennedy Chandler in the lineup, I think that they're gonna present some issues for Ole Miss. So,
all right, Blake, tell folks quickly about our partnership with Action 24/7.
Yep, Action 24/7. We will put the link in the description of this video. You can sign up your first deposit. They'll match up to $800, I believe, and you just put in the code South14. And yeah, obviously basketball in full swing, so you can use that. Head on over there, and again, link will be in the description. And South14, put that in, and they'll match it. So there you go.
All right, enjoyed it, Blake. We'll be back to talk about some of these games when they're played. Remember, we've got previews of tonight's games. We're doing this on Tuesday. We previewed the games of Tuesday night yesterday, so we're about a day and a half out in front of this one. But anyway, thanks for watching. We'll be back with plenty more of these throughout basketball season.